Well, hello there. My name is HW, and thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. Recently had the idea to do a little video talking about overdrives into the Kemper, and I got a new pedal in the mail. It's the Jackson Audio Broken Arrow, and it's just stellar. I mean, it is just a fantastic pedal. And I'm going to do my best to sort of remember some of the presets in here. I'll run you through a couple of them. But primarily I want to talk about the Kemper and running some drives into the Kemper. So if you wandered into this video and you're a Jackson Audio fan and you're not a fan of the Kemper, you just know this is a Kemper channel. So please save me the comment of, why didn't you do it through a tube amp? Well, it's because we make Kemper content over here at Tone Junkie TV. We're proud of it. We do some Helix stuff too, but Kemper primarily. Here is my clean tone, and then I want to talk about some tips for putting overdrives in here, and we'll hear the Broken Arrow. I'm playing the Bend Sun Butterfly US 3 profile, and it's just an American clean sound. You can get this very similar tone with a some sort of a Fender Deluxe, any American style amp, a Hot Rod Deluxe, whatever you're playing. You know, Stratty American kind of thing. This is a custom shop 59 Journeyman Strat with dual mag pickups, and it's very cool. We call it Goldie. Anyway, let's try this out. So first things first, there's a green light, a green and a red light that appears above the input of the Kemper. And that light will sometimes flash red. Now a lot of times people get very worried, like, oh no, what am I going to do? The light flashed red, I need to get rid of this or something. Don't worry about it. Unless you hear digital clipping, I would largely say you can ignore that light and view it as like a caution light. Here's why. When that light flashes red, you have 20 decibels left over of clean headroom. So 20 decibels left over of clean headroom from the time that light flashes red to the time you will actually get digital clipping. So if you see that light just creeping into, red a little bit, I would say don't worry about it unless you hear a clip, right? Maybe you stomp on a pedal and it makes a loud pop and you get that pop sounds like it distorted or something. I mean, that's noise in your signal chain. You can't really blame the Kemper for that. But maybe you have some super high boost. I don't even know how people could actually get digital clipping out of the front input. Like, I mean audible clipping. I know it can go red, but that red light is really telling you, hey, back off. I'm not designed for that. So, there is a Kemper hack to give you a pad over the input if you're using a pedal board and you have to use big boosts in front. But I would say, I'll show you that in another video. We'll call that the pedal board hack. The pedal board input hack or something. But for this video, I just want to say that the red light in the Kemper should be used almost to just understand that you're getting to the point where you could approach clipping. But 20 decibels is so much. I would say unless you see it on half the time, I wouldn't worry about it, or unless you actually hear sort of a clipped signal, if that makes sense. So, okay, let's try one more thing. Let's talk about this. I've got no compressor on or anything. If I add a compressor, I'd be adding it after this drive, so I don't want to do that right now. But normally I would use a light compression with some of the drive. But the other little tip I want to talk about here is right here in the amp section. Start with a profile that has a definition of about 5 or maybe a little bit less. To me, 4 to 5 is the sweet spot. If you're playing a Voxy profile or something, you can get away with using a profile that maybe has a higher definition control. But let's talk about why that might be. The definition control is sort of, you can view it as like an overall brightness control for the Kemper. It's sort of this variable EQ that sort of determines how defined the notes are. Now, it's not really an EQ, and it's not really an overall EQ for the Kemper at all. But a lot of times people think of it that way, and it's helpful. If you feel like a profile is a little too woolly, a little too bassy, a little too dark, you can go ahead and increase the definition, and a lot of times that will take care of it. What I think this profile is doing, and credit to Michael Britt, this is his theory, we've talked about this, it may be limiting the amount of bass that's going into like a gain stage. And that would be a typical thing that a tube amp manufacturer would do to sort of determine how much breakup or how tight, how defined the sound is going to be, the high end's going to be, or how loose or woolly the low end will be on the opposite end of the spectrum. So if you think about that, Kemper might be limiting the amount of bass and fullness going in there. Well, that results to our ear as, hey, there's less woolliness, it's tighter, I now can hear more brightness. I have less of these low frequencies sort of plugging up the frequency spectrum, and so now I can hear better some of the brightness, and I don't have woolliness. The woolly quality I'm talking about are those overly bassy sort of broken up sounds. It's sort of a fuzzy sound, but it's a very loose sounding bass. You get it a lot on Fender stuff, Fender blackface stuff, when you push the amp too high. The bass becomes very loose. On the other side of the spectrum, something like a Mesa Mark 1, Mark 4, Mark 5, very tight bass, very, very tight bass. And what happens is that tight bass works really well for gained up tones, but when you go back down to lower gain tones, sometimes people say, this feels lifeless. It's because that bass in the low end is so tight, it's not loose and it doesn't give. Usually players like a little bit of looseness and give because it provides a nice big 3D bass for lower gain stuff, but for higher gain stuff, that 3D looseness becomes too much and you want a tighter bass. The definition control really seems to be giving us control over that. Sort of and it seems to be adding in some high end too, so it seems to be doing some different stuff. We really should measure the definition control and just talk about what it's doing on the spectrum as we increase it or decrease it, but that is for another video. Let's leave those definition controls sort of in the middle. So number one, watch your red light, make sure you're not clipping. You probably aren't, but if you hear digital clipping, let's back off. And then number two, let's have a definition control setting of between 4 and 6, let's say. But really, let's keep it close to between 4 and 5. Sound good? Okay, let's try the Jackson Audio Broken Arrow a little bit here. King of Tone's my favorite overdrive, but this thing is absolutely stellar. Yeah, I think it's tied for my favorite right now. First, let's talk about the boost side. So for the boost side, I'm just going to show you one boost, my favorite boost. It's the green boost in here, and it's completely separate from the drive. And this green boost, I love it when colors kind of dictate or clue you into what it's going to be. It's a mid-range kind of boost. So my Strat sounds like this. It sounds like the Strat. There's not more gain, but it's pushing a little bit. I've got a little bit of a noisy Stratocaster here, but it's pushing, you know, the sort of mid-range up and giving it that fat sort of, I mean, on the neck, it's real fat, you know? Now, with the YouTube compression and stuff and some equalization that they seem to put on the videos, you might not notice how much louder that is, but it is quite a bit louder. And that's one of the things that's interesting. A lot of times people say they're not able to get sort of a louder sound with the Kemper and the boosts. To that I would say, well, let's make sure we're using a cleaner profile. I like to keep the gain right around this range here. Right around, let's get a reading there. For me, 3.5 is pushing it. 4, I guess you could go to, but you start to limit the amount of push you can get. So this profile is like 2.7 on the gain, but you know, I can get a clean sound. And then with a boost, I'm not necessarily getting more gain. Any more gain I'm getting is actually coming from the profile, giving me more gain because it's being pushed in the front end. And there's some more mid-range coming from this boost, but there's no drive coming from the boost. Now, there's two ways to think about this. You might be saying, HW, why would I want one sound louder than another? Well, you would use a boost in that instance to sort of just come up for a solo or just for the dynamics of a song. But this is often something people complain about. Now, with many profiles, I'm able to boost a lot, and I'm able to get the amount of boost that I would expect out of a tube amp. It's quite a bit lower in volume. And that's good. Now, how are we getting that? Well, we're just using a profile that's not so gainy. One trick, too, that I'll just mention here that a lot of people have found, if you do use a profile that has sort of the gain on 5 or less, so 5 or less on the gain, you might notice, if you use a profile that's like 5, not 5, straight up and down here, like halfway up the gain knob on the Kemper, you can actually back that off, and a lot of times people say you get more headroom. That could be true. That might be true. I've experienced kind of what they're talking about, but with a lot of clean profiles, I don't seem to have a problem getting the boost to push up a little bit. Now, why might you be having a problem having the boost push up in the Kemper? Well, on a tube amplifier, we don't have a separation between volume and gain. Gain and volume are the same thing. And what I mean by that is we are doing the same thing to the tube amp circuits to get more volume and to get more gain. The amount of gain compared to volume is being determined by how much headroom those tubes have left before they break up and before they reach a maximum output volume, which usually happens about halfway up the gain knob. About halfway up, tubes stop getting louder and they start getting dirtier, more saturated. Well, how does that compare or contrast with the Kemper? Many digital modelers try to model the Kemper. The Helix try to model tube amps. The Helix comes to mind with this. In the Helix, you do have an actual volume control. You have an output control over different models. But the gain knob is acting as a tube would. In the gain knob, on many of the patches in the Helix, as you increase the gain, you're increasing the volume and the gain together, which is how a tube would react. But the Kemper has done something completely different for us here. Kemper has completely delinked gain and volume. They're completely independent controls now. They have nothing to do with each other. That is to say, I can simply increase the amount of gain here, and I don't need to go adjust my volume. HW, I have some profiles that are louder than others of the same gain setting. I'm aware of this. Let's get into that in another video, why that could be. There's kind of two modes the Kemper can create profiles on, and that can have little differing effects on the loudness of cleaner profiles to dirtier profiles. But there's actually internal controls that can help you balance those out better. We'll save that for another video. But the Kemper is unique in this way, in that you can increase the volume and decrease the volume and not affect gain, but you can also increase the gain and not affect the volume at all. Now, to some people, this is strange at first. They go, "Why I increase the gain? It just seems to be more compressed." Well, it is more compressed because now you're using a master volume to limit the sound. It's not more compressed because the actual dynamic of the profile is more compressed. It's more compressed because you've increased gain and you're not hearing more of a dynamic range from volume or from maybe increased output from your speaker, your listening device. That also can be a level of compression. We're getting really into the weeds here, but I just wanted to kind of let you guys know that by decoupling volume and gain, Kemper has both done us a big favor and provided us a little bit of a challenge, because we now have to just be sure that we're not limiting with the master volume so far down that we don't hear the differences in the dynamics, because dynamics for us as we perceive it also has to do with perceived volume. So boosts give us an increased dynamic range because they raise the volume, and then our light touch on the guitar allows us to come down in volume as well, even with a boost on. So what does that mean? It means turn up a little bit. Or if your boost isn't working, try turning the master up on your Kemper. Try turning up the master a bit, because you're dealing with the physical limitations of sound now, not so much the limitations of the profile or the technology or even the sound, but you have to be able to hear the dynamic range through these filters here, if that makes sense. So, all that to say, let's just try some more of this Broken Arrow, shall we? I'm going to turn on my kind of one of my favorite drive settings here, and this is the blue drive. This is like a let's see, what is it? It's a symmetrical clipping, 4 silicone diode symmetrical clipping, and it's the type of clipping you would find in the Timmy, although this pedal doesn't sound like other pedals, but it's a similar type of breakup you might get. Very cool sound. Gosh, that's a great tone. And then you go ahead and add the mid boost on top of that. Now, it's not adding any drive, but it's adding a mid boost. Even on the Strat bridge, it's pretty nice and fat. What's cool about the Broken Arrow here, and to me, by the way, these are, you don't need any amp will do this. You know what I mean? This kind of sound. The Broken Arrow really is doing all the heavy lifting here. You can come over here. You can make this thing blink, and then you can cycle over to, here's like a Marshall. It's supposed to be wide open like a Marshall, kind of like a classic Marshall. Not a ton of gain in these things, and I got the gain pretty high. It's a very cool sort of just open Marshall-y sound. It is pretty vintage Marshall. And you've got a bunch of controls here. You can add more mids. You could scoop it out a little more to get more of like a JTM 45 type sound, which would probably be pretty cool. And I'm just going to lower the gain and do that. Of course, adding a mid boost there. The other cool little sound in here is kind of like, if you're a fan, here we go. Whoops, I went right by it. If you're a fan of the full drive, remember the flat mid mode and the full drive? Well, there's a similar thing kind of going on here, because this green, this is classic Screamer, 2 symmetrical silicone diodes, giving that classic drive and compression from the Tube Screamer. And but it doesn't have that huge mid boost. You actually have still the 3-band EQ. And one of the things I like about this pedal is there's a little detent on the center of the EQ there, so you know when you're back to 0. And this is a really usable sound for worship stuff, for all sorts of stuff. But it sounds like this. It's really responsive, really feels great, and I mean, it doesn't, you know, you can even scoop it out a bit more, and you're just going to get a really great tone. There, it's almost like acting more like a Morning Glory, sort of adding just, actually that's still more like beefiness than a Morning Glory, but it's almost just acting, you know, not a lot of mid-range add, but just a lot of just saturation. That compression is really what I think I'm talking about. Dude, this is a great pedal. It's a killer pedal. The guys at Jackson have done a pretty impressive thing here. I love the King of Tone. I use the King of Tone into the Kemper at home. I use the King of Tone with the Kemper. It baked into a profile, primarily at church. And to me, this is a stellar pedal, and you guys should check it out. Now you're probably thinking, HW, how are you going to talk about the Jackson Audio Broken Arrow without mentioning that you can step through the gain stages? You can. That's cool. But I can honestly say, even if it didn't have that, I would like it just for what it is here. I really like this pedal for all the different modes. My only drawback is now I like so many of the modes. I almost would love to see a larger version of this, because I want to get access to kind of like all. To me, the magenta's cool, but I like the green, blue, and amber the best. And to me, the green and amber are really the nice ones. But the Suze is gonna like the blue one. Anyway, I've been HW. I hope this has been helpful. Use a profile that is sort of clean already. If you're having a hard time finding one that is clean but lets your boosts come up, use the little trick maybe of starting with a dirtier profile and cleaning it up. Find one that can boost up a little bit. And so for me, use a gain range between 2 and 4. I'm using one at 3, 2.7. Watch that red light and keep the definition control kind of right in the middle. And that is how I'm sort of taming any of these random, pedals that I run into. And they all seem to work pretty well at the Kemper, and they work pretty good. I've been HW. Thank you so much for watching.